We may as well get started and anyone else can catch up with the recording when it comes on. My name is Ian Biggs. I'm project manager with the CRC for Developing Northern Australia, based in Townsville. And this session this afternoon has come about through a application which came from Alan Buckle at AgriFutures and Neil McDonald on a welfare project for the buffalo industry, and we've agreed to fund that in coordination with AgriFutures and put out this EOI call for research proposals to address the issue. It'll go through, we've got a short PowerPoint presentation which will go through the issue and some of the CRCNA criteria for proposals, and then we'll hopefully have time for additional comments and questions. So let me see if I can share a screen and get my presentation up.
And whilst Ian's doing that, I'll just do a short introduction of myself. So my name is Ellen Buckle and I work for AgriFutures and I'm in the research team. I'm one of the senior managers there, and I look after a number of our programs. So I look after buffalo, farmed deer, kangaroo, tea tree oil, goat fibre and rat hide.
Not working?
We see all of the slides rather than just the slideshow.
Can you guys hear me? Is my sound working all right?
We can hear you, Phil.
Okay, thanks. Ian, your sound cuts in and out a bit. It's a bit hard to hear you. Is there a microphone or something?
It's up on the wall, so I'll just try and project my voice a bit clearer.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the expression of interest here is in the supply chain best practice to improve health and welfare of buffalo during harvest in Arnhem Land, Northern Territory. So really we'll just run around through a bit about CRCNA, AgriFutures, buffalo industry, key dates for the EOI submission, some issues that we want addressed in that EOI call, and then deal with CRCNA bureaucracy and go to questions. So CRCNA, for those who don't know, was came out of the white paper for developing Northern Australia. Federal government put $75 million for us to co-fund with industry across agriculture, health service delivery and traditional owner-led businesses in either of those two fields. We're now 5.5 years into our 10 years. And in that time, there have been 79 projects, valued about 90 million, over 30 students supported, and a cross-section of, that gives you a flavour of the diversity is that the spice industry has started in Northern Australia with Nigella and sesame seeds, which has started to replace imported products. Health service, there's a project around hookworm saliva, which is being used to treat type 2 diabetes. Agriculture has shown there's over 2,000 new jobs required as the agriculture industry develops across the north, and new ways of designs for mango orchards, which promise of over 3.5 times the production from the same land area. So all these things in CRC are about de-risking investment across Northern Australia and enabling sustainable development and boosting the economic output and potential of Northern Australia. And we see that through 4 pillars. Enabling infrastructure is we don't fund the building of things, but we see this about the answering of questions and impediments to industry. So the research that underpins those industries in either agriculture or health service delivery. And then there's water is also a key factor in Northern Australia. And again, we don't build dams, but this is research that's underpinning the efficient use of water in communities and agriculture. Indigenous estate, mean, over 50% of the land in Northern Territory has First Nations people ownership or management input. So we see this as a really key resource which can be activated to really boost economic development across the north, but also help raise those communities to their development. And policy harmonisation, where we have two states, one territory, and the federal government. We think that's a key issue and somewhere where we can have an immediate impact. You want to take over?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ian. So many of you hopefully have heard about AgriFutures. We are small, but we try and be mighty. Our investments are driven by our strategic plans. So we have an overarching AgriFutures strategic plan, and then across our 13 levied industries, we have strategic plans that are designed specifically around the needs of that industry and the stakeholders in those industries. And it's all about ensuring that we meet the needs of those industries. And our next 5-year strategic plan has just been endorsed by Minister Murray Watt a couple of months ago, and our industries are central to delivering on that 5-year plan. That's just a very general line about what we're doing, but we also have a number of things such as Evoke Ag, an annual conference and a number of things that happen there. Grow Ag, which is about trying to link all of the research that happens within Australia to potential international investors. And we also have cross-sectoral responsibility. So we have an annual budget of about $50 million, and about 20 of that sits in our levied industries. Back to you, Ian.
Is Tom online to talk about the industry? You want to keep going on this one, Ellen?
I'll do this and then I'll just hand over to Tom at the end. So the buffalo industry is two parts. There is a small free-range, dairy buffalo industry across the country, but there's a very large free-range harvesting industry in NT. So there's estimated to be somewhere between 250,000 free-range buffalo in the NT. And for our First Nations people, it's both a resource and a pest. So currently there's about 10,000 per year harvested, but that's increasing. So next year it looks like probably close to 11,000 into live export and 11,000 into the bachelor abattoir. They increase by about 28 to 30,000 per year. And we really need that bachelor abattoir to be running to take on many of the larger animals that don't go into the live export supply chain. It's an interesting industry in that the last 18 months or so, it's really transitioning to more of an increasingly managed industry, reflecting the model that the rangeland goats industry in Australia has had, which is also enabling a longer live export market, and it's also enabling the bachelor abattoir to run longer. It's intending to run for 10 months next year, rather than the 5 or 6 that it ran this year. And now, Tom, if you're online, would you like to just briefly touch on the opportunities around the in-kind support that yourself and the Industry Association can provide?
Thank you, Ellen. Just very briefly, the NT Buffalo Industry Council, I guess, is happy to be supporting this work, and will probably act as a bit of a conduit between the lead parties and putting them in contact with our membership across the supply chain. So that can be in any shape or form as required, both in early stages, but then sort of ongoing as we're drawing on data and needing to get in contact with what's happening at the commercial front. So we're happy to play that role, and certainly I think today's recording will go to a number of people keen to have input and participate, who are typically not able to dial into these sorts of things during office hours. So I'm happy to leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Next slide, Ian. So this is the most current live export figures for buffalo and year to date, and the countries that they've went to. As you can see, Indonesia is the largest market for this year, but the numbers are certainly, we're looking at anticipating probably 11,000 in total for this year, which is a big increase from a couple of years ago. Next slide, Ian. Okay, so this is the AgriFutures Buffalo Program Strategic RD&E plan that was pulled together by Neil, and he did do a fabulous job in pulling together this plan. It's very well done and very well articulated. So there's 5 priorities that have been recognised through this plan. One is the reduction of mortality in the live export supply chain. Secondly, development of free-range field processing equipment. The third is the feed stocks, which is a measurement of the feed conversion efficiency. The fourth was the ration formulation for the feeding of milk and buffalo. And the fifth was the market insight study for improved buffalo products. It's been undertaken by NTBIC in conjunction with an external company. So this expression of interest process focuses on the first and the third priorities here. And whilst we've talked here about the threat to the live export trade is caused by the high mortality of buffalo and export vessels, that was the case a few years ago. But if we had anyone from DAF in here, either Joffred or Kendall from the live export team, is the industry has very much turned this around drastically over the last 2 seasons, and we've got much lower mortality because that was really key learnings. But as I'll hand over to Neil later after slide 14, but we don't actually have the science to underpin that rapid improvement in mortality and animal welfare. Next slide, Ian. Okay, and this is just a slide from our plan, and that just sort of demonstrates, in particular, on the right-hand side, the supply issues that we currently see, and some of those around the slow and difficult processes to get agreement from traditional owners, difficult to safely tag and dehorn wild buffalo in the field, insufficient capacity of depots where young buffalo can grow under grazing. They've often not had sufficient time to adapt after capture, and the shipping and quarantine diet is not specific for buffalo, and that leads to those issues. So you can view all of this in detail within the AgriFutures Buffalo Plan, which is on our website. Next slide, and then over to you, Ian.
Thanks, Ellen. So the expressions of interest for this project actually opened last week. We put the form up, probably wasn't widely communicated. The close for expressions of interest is on the Friday, the 20th of January, 5 o'clock on Queensland time. And that's really so that we can get these projects contracted by March, which CRCNA are on that. We're on a bit of a time watch to get our projects funded and out, and also we want this project commenced. Because another date which isn't there is that all projects have to be finished by June 2026, because CRCNA is starting to wrap up. We will take questions through either contacting myself or through this email address here. And the deadline for questions will be Tuesday the 17th. That just gives us time to put those questions up on the website so that the answers are known and accessible to everybody who's applying. Well, this is a CRCNA AgriFutures joint funding. CRCNA is managing all aspects of the project development and management. To apply, if you can go to the CRCNA website, you'll see links to both a information pack and to an EOI form, and we'll get to that in a few slides. Eligibility from CRCNA perspective, we like all our projects policies that they have an industry partner, or they're industry led, or they have a very clear strategy of interacting with industry as an end user of the research. So there has to be a very strong industry component to the proposals put forward. We want to demonstrate that the lead proponent has strong partnerships in place to deliver on those required activities. Want you to identify the key research activities and how these will contribute to answering the research questions. Again, that's noting that the projects cannot go past 30th June 2026. While CRCNA, we need to have our funding matched by the proponent, neither in kind or cash. The cash issue is not so critical in this one because AgriFutures are matching CRCNA, but it's if there are two equal projects, we always go with the shiny money.
Ian, can I just point out the obvious? I agree that we need to look at this work. The timing over Christmas is not all that flash, really. We've got a number of staff away. They'll only be returning from leave around the 20th of January, and it is the quiet time for livestock over this period.
Yep, we are totally aware of that, Phil, and I guess it's a matter of what the proposals look like. The proposals that are put forward are really for us to evaluate who to work with and then develop the project from. So the EOI form, when you get to it, is really about developing the idea rather than the nitty detail of the project.
So this is more like a preliminary research proposal rather than in depth. So what CRCNA is looking for is the broad almost expression of interest, and then once we have that, it's a matter of then we have time then to develop up with the parties what the research looks like, and we can do that sort of in a quite an intense fashion in February and early March to get that contracted. So it's not like for some organisations, they require sort of war and peace at this EOI stage, where when Ian walks you through the form, it's really broader than that. So it's not that, if you were going to develop the entire 3-year project or 2.5-year project along with the methodology, you're right, you would need to be sitting down for the next month to do it. But when Ian walks you through that form, it's a bit of a lighter touch.
But we do want the research that when you're thinking through this project, the research data produced has to be scientifically credible and reproducible, which all research organisations aim for. But we really want it to be developing that research data and the communication and adoption and implementation of that data by industry and a commercial practice, and also having that so that it's giving you an evidence base to take for policy development on a federal basis. There's a range of proposal research activities which are there, and these are a guide. They're not hard and fast, but really it's about addressing the adverse health and welfare outcomes of those buffalo along supply chains, and that capture free range to destination markets. So understanding what those risk factors are and how you will use that data to overcome those. And it's understanding the on-ship aspects as well around that, which Alan has said has already been dealt with. And that, again, that comes back to this proposal being based on the EOI form, on the R&D plan form, which is a living situation and is a few years old. But that's where we want the proponents to work with industry to understand the current state of that situation. And that goes for this vaccinating against pneumonia, where the pneumonia is caused by the stress, and vaccinating may be important or might be a minor, and Neil will talk to that shortly. The feed ration is actually a cattle feed ration currently, and we want to understand if that's suitable for buffalo as they go through the free range to export and in yards. The study will include different animal sizes if they're doing a large capture or herding of free-range animals. There are a range of different animals in that cohorts that are captured. Consider the climate conditions and the lengths of voyages. We have stated a minimum study of 4 voyages over 2 years. Again, all these things are open to negotiation, but we do want consideration of the voyage. These are some possible researchable questions which were put forward by Alan and Neil. And again, the project doesn't have to deal with every one of these, but it's a matter of developing that project that will capture that main issue of reducing those fatalities in livestock and the threats to that export market, which is the economic backbone of the industry. So these are all in that EOI information pack. You can work your way through them. Anything you want to add there, Alan?
Well, there was one small thing. I did want to mention that I have talked to Zoetis about their vaccination for bovine respiratory disease, and they have indicated that they would be willing to work with the whoever gets the contract for doing this work. And they've also indicated that they would do, because it's not cheap vaccine, but they would do some in kind to provide vaccine at no cost. So once that sort of up and ramps up, we can provide all those details in for that. But I also wanted to hand over at this point in time to Neil, because he has some very sort of important elements to add on, I suppose, how we go about this.
Thanks, Ellen. Yep. As has been pointed out, this is a commercial process, and it's therefore, there's been a lot of environmental changes even in the 2 years since this plan was drawn up and the project was first devised. And so it's important for those who take on the EOI that they consider the changes, and if we're not asking the right questions, then change the question or discuss with Ian how the question can be changed, and certainly change the emphasis. So, for example, in the last 2 years, it's been pointed out the abattoir has become far more important. So this has to also cater for animals going to the abattoir. And in the meantime, the Vietnamese trade has dropped off, which took a lot of the big animals. So we don't want to ignore that, but just accept that the environment changes all the time. Second issue is that this is all to do with welfare and not just survival. You can't just count bodies as being the parameter. So you need to consider the stress indicators, the feeding, feed intake, weight changes, all those sort of things. These are the things that will be measured. The buffalo deaths on board are mostly from pneumonia, but that's stress related. So although it does, as Ellen said, include an investigation of the vaccination, it would be unacceptable nowadays just to stress the animals and then try and stop them from dying by vaccinating. We have to find where the stress points are along the chain and address those. It's also, because you're following the supply chain right through, a lot of solutions may be to do with the practices of how they're harvested and transported and so on. And any changes of practice must also take into consideration the other purpose of this, which is the need to reduce the population in sensitive areas. It's of course important to trade, it's important to Indigenous communities and so on, but there has to be a way that the population in sensitive areas can be reduced. And as has been pointed out, it's all going to be scientific evidence based. There's plenty of anecdotal evidence, and there's plenty of people sitting here this morning that could probably suggest what the solutions are, but we're not going to get any further until we get any proper scientific data. And there's been very little of that collected. It must be implementable by industry, exporters, Northern Territory and federal governments. And that means that any proposals have to be in enough detail. So, for example, I don't think it's good enough just to say, oh, well, they need to be stopped at some point for longer in the supply chain. You need to know under what conditions, how will they be fed, what would be the cost of that? Would the cost be practicable inside the in the trade? So I think economics is important. Any changes have to be feasible, economically feasible, and so the team would have to really understand the economics of the supply chain. I'd also want to point out that there's 4 documents that if you want to follow through on this, you should have a look at. One is the strategic plan that's available on the AgriFutures website. And I should have acknowledged that Barry Lemke was the co-author of this. It wasn't just me. Secondly, the Buffalo Industry Council, they've got their own strategic plan, which is on their website, which explains the harvesting process quite well. And they've got their code of conduct, which is a really good document. So those 2 documents. And the 4th one to be read is the live export reports to Parliament, which you'll find on the Federal Department of Agriculture website, which will give all the statistics for reportable incidents from buffalo, and as well as all the other species that are exported. And I think that's all for now. I'll hand back to you, Ellen or Ian, who's going.
The other point that Neil made to me when we're talking about is the economic analysis and the economic importance of implementing the whatever research is there, not only getting commercial change, but understanding economic benefits and costs of what is being proposed. My limited understanding is that export supply chain is the most profitable at the moment. I don't know how that's still the case, Neil.
Yeah, well, I think so. For those animals that can go export, it certainly is, yes.
So, and if we can, so maintaining that one maintains the industry and therefore helps that environmental, ecological control measure and enables those communities to be making.
Right, there is one more thing I forgot to mention that should be mentioned, is the time of the year. I think it'd be very important, whoever takes this work on, that they can gear up pretty quickly, because if you look at the statistics for previous reportable incidents, it's always at the end of the year that the majority of these are, and that could be a mixture of 2 reasons. One, climate, of course, that's the hot season, and also because that will be when the majority of Arnhem Land wild caught buffalo are coming on stream. So if you weren't able to research on that in 2023, then you'd be seriously getting behind. And so I think at least by September, people should be out in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, from CRCNA, if you go to the CRCNA webpage, you'll find there's a 4 stories or projects highlighted at the front, and this EOI call is one of those. If you click on the link there, it'll take you to this page. And 2 things that you'll find at this page are, one, the link to the information pack, and the other is to the EOI form. So, as well as those documents that Neil's mentioned, the information pack has some background on the industry, but also some of the issues that we really want covered in the proposals and projects that you develop. And the EOI form is the only way that we want these expressions of interest submitted. We don't want them emailed to either Ellen or myself. The EOI form enables us to handle those applications when they come in. So on that EOI form, so understanding that time of year, and we will work with those applications when they come in, and probably do a little bit of contact those proposals and discuss expressions of interest submitted, but there'll be details of the lead organisation, brief summary of the project that's being proposed, some detail about your the objectives, the timelines, your outcomes and pathways of impact, communication and implementation strategies. There'll be some financials that we want incorporated there, but these are really, largely these are the total sums rather than the detailed financial breakdown. So understanding that once the EOI is accepted, that can be moved to some degree, but not a lot. So while we don't want the detail, we want those to be relatively accurate. I want to understand who your project participants are, and there's a list of some selection criteria about the actual components. These are really around for us to understand who you are and your capability to do the research. And then there's, of course, there's a declaration section at the end, which needs to be completed. So we can certainly assist with that, with the development of EOI. CRCNA is quite happy to work with proponents as they develop their EOIs and answer questions as we go and work through that proposal. Considerations are that we generally don't consider late submissions, but considering the time of year, we might be flexible on that. We'll just have to see how many we get. And while incomplete submissions are not generally viewed favourably, again, considering the time of year, we will possibly be a bit relaxed on that as well. Again, just use the online form. Don't email submissions separately. Previous people who've applied to CRCNA may have thought they had to be a member. That's no longer the case. There is an information pack, and we advise you to read that. It kind of takes you through a few criteria, but again, this was set out for a different time of year, so we will be a little bit more relaxed, and also a slightly shorter response time has been brought on us. Myself and Ellen are possibly available for questions, although Ellen's taking some leave, and so are we. So understanding that our availability is not there as well, again, we will be a little bit flexible. there's an email question there, and any questions and their responses will be up on the website. And that's the end of the PowerPoint session. So if people have questions, please pop up your hand.
Ian, when will you and Ian be back from leave?
CRCNA closes Friday and we'll be back on Monday, the 9th of January.
I am away until the 16th, but I've given Ian my personal mobile phone, and I'm happy to give that to anyone and take calls specifically on this project over that time.
So Phil, we totally accept the fact that it's a short turnaround from when EOI is released and when we're taking calls. We normally have a longer period, and also the time of year. So while we're trying to get some urgency there in the process, we're open to being a little bit more flexible than usual.
Did you have any other questions, Andrew?
G'day, Ian. Andrew Hopkins, CSIRO. Just a quick question around financials. I couldn't see anywhere in there if you have any expectation on the size of these projects.
Well, the funding from CRCNA and AgriFutures will be a combined $1 million. So that's the cash contribution, maximum cash contribution that will be put in. That's CRCNA has that 1-to-1 factor, so that's the 500,000. So we want to see at least 500,000 of in-kind from project proponents. But they're the bottom lines.
No worries. Thanks for that, Ian. And can I just follow up with one other clarification? You had a slide up before which was around proposals must include the following research activities. So can I just clarify, you want a proposal that includes those 6 different research activities in there, at least?
Yes, look, I think when I look at those, I mean, they are all things that need to be included in the project. Like, we need to look at those risk factors as a start. That's sort of like a bit of a desktop study and a few phone calls to people in the industry. We need to investigate that relationship across the supply chain. And then we do need to do that piece of work around that will actually inform that piece of work around the efficacy of vaccinating export buffalo against pneumonia. We need to look at the pelleted feed rations and what's the most suitable. And we do need to look at the different animal sizes, because obviously a small heifer is going to be different to a 600 kilogram bull. We need to look at, the changes between exports in May versus exports in October. Yeah, so we do need to cover across all of those things. Does that seem, was that what your question was, Andrew?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify if you were anticipating it would be a sort of single project covering off on all of those things, that you're anticipating more than one project that might cover off on pieces.
We would prefer a single project that covered off on all of those things. However, Ian, if we had multiple, like 2 projects that covered off on all of those things, would that be satisfactory from a CRCNA viewpoint?
Ellen, if you don't mind jumping in, I do think that both the vaccine trial and the feed ration are relatively minor aspects compared to the study of the whole supply chain. So I think people should think about it that way.
And when we're assessing the proposals that come in, we often, if we see 2 proposals which we think if combined would make a stronger project, we may well contact both proponents and see if they're prepared to work together. That's so if somebody is stronger in one facet and weaker in another, we may well try and combine both parties together to develop a stronger overall project.
No worries. Thanks for that, Ian, Ellen, and Neil.
Thanks. Is there any other questions or comments? Barry, I see you've leaned forward. It looks like you're desperate to make a comment. Oh, you need to unmute, Barry. Oh, no, I don't think Barry can unmute. It's down the bottom left-hand side of your screen, Barry.
Is that better?
Yes.
No, I haven't got any comments at this stage.
Okay. Look, I would like to say thank you to CRCNA for coming on board on this project. I mean, without their support, we certainly would not be able to, I think, address these factors with the level of scientific rigor that we really need. So it's a great thing that CRCNA are working. We're working together to deliver on this.
I can say that when the AgriFutures proposal was put to the CRCNA board, they saw this as the sort of work that they thought CRCNA should have been doing 4 years ago, because it involves both a Northern Australian industry that is important and it has that environmental impact, but also brings in First Nations people and communities as well as the whole industry. So it ticked off on a lot of boxes with CRCNA. So we're really keen to see it up and running and kicking it off. Neil, any final comments?
Well, just that I think that any team that addresses this is going to have to really know how to work in remote parts of the Northern Territory. And equally, they're going to have a bit of scientific clout and economic clout. So you're going to have to get a few, I think, get a few skilled people together.
Right.
I can't imagine someone, who hasn't got some links or work, has done some work in remote areas, being able to cope with some of this, and equally anyone who doesn't have some of the specialist skills in, for example, assessing stress levels of animals or something like that. They're going to need to get all of those skills together.
Yeah. Rod, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick question. Thanks for the presentation. I noticed that the project boundary seems to stop at disembarkation in market. Could you just explain the reasoning around that, and any potential issues around the transport, lairage, and slaughter of buffalo in market? And that's clearly, it doesn't seem to be a part of the scope of the study.
No, and it's deliberately not, because at that point we no longer have control of the animals nor ability to. I mean, SCAS is what is, from a government viewpoint, is the overriding. They're the ones who sort of monitor animals post disembarkation. This project is very much about the live export component, which is up until, like, the way the industry is judged is that health and welfare, including the reportable mortality instances, which are up to the point of disembarkation. So I mean, I have been approached by Austrex to look at in-market stunning, etc., but that is outside of the scope of this project.
Okay, understood.
Neil, you didn't want to add anything to that about why, you know, within the, I suppose, the development of the plan, why we limited it to the, you know, point of disembarkation?
I think you've explained it quite well. I mean, it's got to stop somewhere.
Yeah.
Ellen, it's Tom here.
Hi, Tom.
Yeah, and I think that's right. We've certainly got interest from further in the supply chain, but I think for the purposes of this study, if we are looking at insights which might be applicable in country, then there's no reason, for instance, that we can't obtain those insights in a comparable setting, you know, in Australia. We especially with Bachelor operating as an abattoir and with some feeding occurring in the top end. So we certainly have, you know, that cooperative interest from the exporters and the importers, but I don't think that's a limitation as such. But it is good to have the scope, I think, bound off at one point. So it's well defined in that respect.
Yeah, and I suppose I also just wanted to make the point that we talk about 4 voyages, but there isn't an expectation or probably even an ability for staff to actually go on those voyages. So there's limited bunks on those voyages, and they're taken up by accredited stock persons. So we will work very closely with the exporters, and many of those stockies are incredibly bright, educated people. So we would work very closely with the exporters. So if there is things that need to be monitored on board, we'd link you up with an exporter to ensure that you could have that relationship and get that data from the voyage. Any other questions at all?
I mean, if you have further questions, please put them in an email. That way we can certainly to either Alan, myself, or both, and we can address those as quickly as possible. That way we also have the question in writing and the answer in writing, and the same question and answer can be given out to everybody.